Surviving a narcissist. You know, some relationships are harmful and others are downright dangerous. And so we want to explore that topic today in this session of 4 Habits to Transform Your Marriage. I'm Carrie Decker, your host. We'll be right back. My guest today is Alice Mills. She's a writer, an English professor, and it looks to me like a cat lover too. So, welcome to the show, Alice. How are you doing today?
Good.
Good. Hey, we're talking here today about surviving a narcissist. I suspect you have some experience along those lines.
I do. I was married for 10 years to a man who had narcissistic personality disorder. Mm. And it was a rough go for me and my 4 years.
Yeah. How bad did it get for you?
Well, by the end of, by the time I was beginning to attempt to escape, because it took me about 4 tries to escape, he had studied brainwashing techniques, and he was trying to brainwash me into quitting my job as a professor and going to work as in a sewing factory. And he started becoming a little violent. His violence was not directed towards me or the girls, but it started being directed towards the animals on the farm on which we lived. So we were very afraid. We lived in a constant state of fear of his rages and his mind games that he would play. Mm-hmm. So it was very degrading. He didn't call me by name, but he had a host of insulting names that he called me. I wasn't allowed to spend any money whatsoever, even though I was the only one working. And I mean, he would literally go through my purse when I came home from working I taught 7 college classes on 3 different campuses, and that's almost double time in terms of teaching. And he would search through my purse to see if I had any receipts, like for a Diet Coke or something that I might have gotten during the day. So he was very cruel, and yet he would, like a typical narcissist, he would. If I left, because I ran away 4 times before it was solid, which is actually very typical of victims of domestic violence, he would reform for about 3 months and be the perfect man for about 3 months, and then he would begin to slip back into his old behaviors. So it got pretty bad. The girls, my daughters, were all so relieved when we left. There wasn't any of this idea where, I miss my daddy. They were one and all glad to be free, and I only wish that I had left sooner.
Yeah. What were the first signs that this was what you were getting into?
Well, we got married when I was 17, so I was so young and stupid. I had no idea what a narcissist looked like, and they're very convincing. He was all about me. He wrote me letters. He would even though he had class later in the day, he would come and pick me up so that I didn't have to take the bus. I mean, he wooed me constantly and wanted to learn all about me, but he was also very controlling, and there were pressures on me to do things that I didn't want to do, which is how I ended up 17 and pregnant and running away and marrying him. So it was just a bunch of naivete, really. I was very naive, and my parents were very naive because they certainly had never seen this behavior, and it just looked like from the outside that he was a great guy who was really into me.
Yeah, a charmer, I suspect.
Yes, he was very smooth.
Yeah. So, what were kind of like the first signs that when you began suspecting that you were being abused?
The first time I really came to grips with it is when it was after I'd finished grad school, and we lived in his parents' cabin up in Big Bear, California. And we stopped at a public restroom. We were out and about that day. And in the restroom, there was a poster that said, Can you answer yes to any of these questions? And there were 10 questions on the wall, and I could answer yes to 9 of the 10. And they said that if you could answer yes to any of them, then you were in an abusive relationship. And that was when it first, I kept telling myself, he's just immature because we got married so young. He was going to somehow grow up. But it wasn't until then, I think he was, like 26 or 27 at the time, that I began to realize this is forever. This is who he is. This is abuse, and it's not ever going to get better.
Yeah. So as your story continued to unfold, and you said you were married for 10 years, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Separated too.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Separated for what?
We were officially married for 12 years, but we separated after 10 years. So the divorce took 2 years. Gotcha. Because divorcing a narcissist has its own challenges.
Yeah, I bet. I suspect he wasn't too cooperative.
No, he actually hired 2 of the meanest lawyers in town, and he was just trying to. It was a fight for him. It wasn't about the kids, but God is so good. God actually was so present with me during that time, and when the final day of court was to figure out the disposition of the kids, and I walk in, and the girls had been with him that week, and my youngest daughter, who was 2, saw me from across the courtroom and screamed, "Mommy, come save me." So no more testimony was needed for that.
I suspect that convinced the judge.
It did. And he actually apologized to my children because he had given us 50-50 custody for 2 years, which was very damaging and difficult.
Yeah. So what brought you to the place where you recognized it was time for you to leave?
It was kind of a gradual process. We moved to this farmhouse in Kentucky where I was completely isolated. And that, of course, is the modus operandi of any kind of abusers. They want to isolate you. And it was just me and the Lord. And I began to read this book called Changes That Heal by Townsend and Cloud. And I began to realize that I'd gotten myself in a completely codependent situation. And it was a revelation to me. And one day I remember saying to him, I'm not responsible for your happiness. That was just a huge revelation to me. And he said, and his response was immediate. He goes, "Yeah, but are you responsible for my unhappiness?" And I could see that he did not, he was not going to take responsibility for anything. So I had tried to escape 3 times. And the 4th time I came home from work, and I had all of these, we were homesteading, which I will never do again. But I had all these little seedlings that I was growing to put in the garden, and I walked into the kitchen, and he had thrown them all away. And the Lord just said to me, He said, Alice, everything that you plant, He will uproot. And so I just knew that. I had this moment where, the Lord was just moving on me. And I ran upstairs and I said, "But Lord, if I leave, then I'm going to be a divorced woman." And that just felt so terrible. It felt worse than living with an abuser, actually, because I had built up marriage as such an idol in my mind. And he gave me a Bible verse, and I looked it up, and it said, and I can't remember the exact verse, but I didn't know what it was. He just gave me the number of it, and I looked it up, and it said, "And neither do I condemn you." There was no condemnation in this. And then I said, "So I'm going to leave." And he gave me another verse, and he said it was, "Let these men go." And by that, I knew that he meant that I needed to leave not only John, but I needed to have no contact with his extremely wealthy family either.
Wow. That's crazy. So
I left without running away. Yeah. I walked out in peace with the girls, and the Lord provided everything that I needed: a church that took care of me, and a home, and a job.
That's great. And God is faithful. That's certainly true. So what about your family during this time? your mom and dad and others, where were they at through all of this?
For a long time, my mom really tried to be an advocate for our marriage, because she had no idea what narcissism was and this kind of abuse. So she was very much in a sense, she ended up enabling it, because she often buffered some of the circumstances that would have been intolerable. And so when I moved to Kentucky, it actually created more of I lost my buffer. So it became much more urgent for me to leave. And this isn't her fault. This is not about her fault. She had no idea. And she would ask me questions like, well, why can't you talk to him? But to someone, and that's something that's typically asked of someone who's living with a narcissist, why don't you just have discussions with him? But you're assuming in that question that one is dealing with a reasonable person. But a personality disorder means that there is a chasm within the personality of that person, and it's not a person as we think of a person. There's a flaw within that personality. And so, however, when I left for the final time, my father had done some serious research on domestic violence, and he flew out and he said, I'm going to stay here until I know that you're not going back. And so in the end, they really supported me, and they were very helpful to me while I was a single mom with 4 daughters. So, they were wonderful, but at first they were victims in some sense as much as I was, because they had never encountered this. There were no narcissists in our family, so we didn't know what it was.
So how about the church and, the different things that you were taught and believed about the Bible? How did that factor in all of this?
Well, what was interesting, it was actually the church that helped me out. I had had surgery, and because, I had to drive myself home from the surgery, because he was not going to take care of me. And I'd gone to this church one time only, and they came to visit me while I was recuperating in the hospital. And the wife, Laverne, said to me, she goes, I don't know, but God has just told me that if you ever need a place to stay, you can stay with us. And she goes, I've never said that to another person in my life. And a day later, when I got home, that was when I knew it was time to leave, and we had a place to go. And so we stayed with her for a week, and that was the week that my parents sent me money, and I was able to get a house to rent, and I was able to hire a lawyer, and I filed, and they actually, this wonderful couple from this little tiny Pentecostal church in the middle of nowhere in Columbia, Kentucky, they went with me to the court dates. They went with me and stayed with me throughout the whole process, and I couldn't have made it without them. And she said that there was actually this one really bizarre moment where John had made a slight attempt to, he never ever just let us go. His last attempt, though, he went to church with us, and he stood up in front of the church and he said, I just want to dedicate my family to the Lord. I just give my family to the Lord. And afterwards, I don't think I saw him again except for court after that. Laverne came to me and she said, see, he just gave the Lord authority over you guys. You are free. And she was right. We were.
So how did you finally escape all of this?
It was God's mercy, because he lost interest in us. Once I won custody of the girls, contact has been almost zero. My youngest daughter, who really hadn't known him very well, spent some time with him and left quickly, because it was clear that he was not right. He was playing all these mind games on her, and she was like, oh. She told me later that she had thought that divorce was her fault because she was the very youngest, and really didn't know him or understand the stories that the older ones and I would tell. And she said, I realized when I saw him that it was just because he was a really bad guy. That wasn't my fault. It's his fault. And so that was a wonderful thing for her to learn. Although I wish she didn't have to go through spending time with him. But he really has disappeared from our lives. Yeah. We have no contact, and that's unusual. That's an unusual thing for a narcissistic abuse, because they don't like to lose you because it makes them look bad. But I think he went on to get a law degree and then became gradually less attached to reality. So when he would surface, it was clear that he was unable to distinguish what was true and what was not. It's been a little bit of an odd journey, but I'm free.
Yeah. So how about your life now? What's it like?
Well, my husband and we met on eHarmony about 5 years later. We had
so there's a little plug for eHarmony right there.
It's right there. We each had about 10 books next to our bed, and 7 of them were the same book. So it was clearly, a match made in at least, the library. And so,
or a match made in eHarmony, one of the two, something must be working.
It's been really wonderful. I realized that I'd never actually been married before. That, the normal stages of a marriage I hadn't been through. I had just been kind of this, kind of a slave. Every part of my day was dedicated to making sure that my ex-husband had everything that he needed. Mm-hmm. And when I married another adult, it was a completely different change. But the girls, it took them a while to trust a man, but they bonded, and they are so grateful that he is their dad. And I'm so grateful that the Lord has provided for them a father figure who is kind and generous, everything that a real father is. So, I have to say that it's as difficult and scary as it is to leave. It is absolutely necessary in order to protect your children from the consequences. And one of my chief regrets was that I stayed as long as I did, because each of my daughters have struggled with depression or anxiety and some PTSD because of our years of abuse.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give to any woman or man? I suspect that it rarely, but I suspect it happens from time to time with women in the relationship. What advice would you give to a person who is facing a similar struggle?
I would first do whatever you can to see a counselor or a pastor or somebody who can give you a perspective on what you're going through. Read books on narcissism so you understand what you're up against. Get yourself a good lawyer if you can. Make good plans to leave, because you are not... The thing that took me so long to wrap my head around was that I wasn't dealing with a normal divorce situation where two people aren't getting along and they can be kind of jerks to each other. I was dealing with someone who was dedicated to destroying me and the kids. Like, that was his goal, because we had shamed him. And so the biggest piece of advice that I would say, though, is to tell the truth. When you're caught in a narcissistic abusive situation, you lie. You lie to everyone to maintain this cover that everything is okay, because you're afraid of what's going to happen at home. But the more people that you tell the truth to, the narcissist can't fight against truth. You have to tell the truth, at first to yourself, and then to people who will believe you. And then what happens is that the truth really does set you free. Narcissists do not like people who tell the truth. And they're looking for people like me. I was naive. I'm very empathetic. And so I kept looking at myself, is it me? I remember praying, Lord, please make me a Proverbs 31 wife. And taking on the problems of the marriage myself. That's what they're looking for, is someone who's earnest and empathetic. So, you have to sometimes recognize that you're in a fight, and you have to fight. And I had a counselor once who said, you're worth fighting for, and you're the only one who can do it. Yeah. And she was right.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Alice, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Like you said, that there's plenty of people that face this challenge themselves, and hopefully they'll be able to see your story and find some hope along the way. We have other great content here at 4 Habits to Transform Your Marriage, and Alice is going to be sharing more with us on this whole topic of narcissistic behavior coming up, and so you won't want to miss that. And so I'll see you next time.